Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. China's activity around Taiwan is continuing to shift into a sustained gray zone enforcement model. Instead of anything resembling open conflict, you're seeing Coast Guard operations, jurisdictional assertions, and controlled law enforcement style patrols designed to blur the line between civilian regulation and strategic pressure. Taiwan's response has hardened. Its Coast Guard is now explicitly instructing commercial vessels to ignore Chinese boarding or inspection requests and report directly to Taiwanese authorities instead. In some scenarios, Taiwanese vessels are being positioned to physically insert themselves between Chinese ships and civilian traffic to prevent enforcement actions from taking place. That is a significant step up in posture, even if the environment is still below open conflict. What matters here is not a single encounter. It's the normalization of contact. Both sides are essentially trying to define what routine looks like in contested waters, and that definition game is becoming just as important as any military movement. Now zoom out, and you see Washington and Taipei trying to build a parallel deterrence layer that looks very different from traditional force posture. Instead of matching platforms one for one with China, the focus is shifting toward distributed unmanned systems. Drones across air, surface, and subsurface domains are becoming the centerpiece of Taiwan's defense modernization plans. U.S. officials have described this approach in blunt terms. The idea is to turn Taiwan into a dense, constantly active unmanned environment that makes any form of coercion slow, expensive, and unpredictable. Not a wall, more like a constantly shifting field of obstacles. Taiwan's government is backing this with multi-billion-dollar procurement plans covering surveillance drones, coastal strike systems, and unmanned maritime platforms. There is also internal political friction over how fast and how centralized that funding should be, but the direction is consistent. The island is moving toward asymmetric density rather than platform parity. Now step over to Europe, where the pressure is less kinetic and more industrial, but arguably just as strategic. Europe is increasingly facing China as a structural competitor in manufacturing and export markets. The issue is not just bilateral trade imbalance. It's that Chinese firms are capturing market share in third regions, Asia, Latin America, and parts of Eastern Europe, where European industry used to have stronger positioning. The hardest hit areas are industrial exports, machinery, transport equipment, and capital goods. These are not marginal sectors. They sit at the center of Europe's economic model, and the trend lines are clear. Over time, Europe's share of global capital goods exports has declined significantly, while China's has expanded sharply. That shift is now feeding directly into European policy debates about industrial defense and strategic autonomy. But Europe is not moving toward full decoupling. Instead, it's leaning into a more targeted response. Sector-specific measures aimed at industries where displacement is most visible. Steel, machinery, and basic chemicals are emerging as early focal points. At the same time, Brussels is still maintaining structured engagement with Beijing. New trade and investment consultation mechanisms are being formalized with regular minister-level meetings scheduled. So what you have is not separation, but managed competition. Pressure rising, but dialogue still intact. Underneath that, there's a deeper vulnerability forming in Europe's technology base. A major concern is the semiconductor supply chain. Europe is exposed in two directions at once. It relies on U.S. technology leadership in chip design and equipment, while also depending on Chinese-controlled critical minerals and materials used in production. That creates a squeeze point. If either side tightens restrictions, Europe feels the impact immediately. And Taiwan Strait instability sits right at the center of that risk profile because it underpins global chip manufacturing continuity. So Europe is effectively operating inside a triangle of dependency: U.S. technology, Chinese materials, and its own limited domestic production capacity. Now move into the broader geopolitical layer, especially Japan. China has been increasing economic and regulatory pressure on Japanese entities tied to advanced manufacturing and defense-linked supply chains. Export controls, restrictions, and targeted trade measures have expanded alongside political friction tied to Taiwan-related statements from Japanese leadership. There is also a growing perception gap in the region about U.S. reliability in a crisis scenario. Japanese analysts and policymakers are watching closely how Washington signals commitment during this period of rising tension. The dynamic here is less about any single policy move and more about long-term alliance confidence under sustained pressure. And then you get a separate but connected signal out of Washington itself. The U.S. has been explicitly pushing back on any scenario involving Chinese control or influence over strategic infrastructure like the Panama Canal. On the surface, that's a regional statement. In practice, it reflects a broader framing of maritime choke points as strategic assets rather than neutral infrastructure. It fits into the same global pattern. Control of routes, access points, and logistics corridors is becoming central again. Back in the Indo-Pacific, China's military modernization continues to move in parallel with its gray zone strategy. One notable development is the increasing flexibility of its carrier aviation. Newer carrier-capable fighter variants are now operating not only from advanced catapult-equipped carriers, but also from older ski-jump carriers. That cross-platform compatibility matters because it increases operational flexibility across the fleet and reduces dependence on a single high-end platform for carrier aviation readiness. It's a technical detail, but strategically, it points toward a more unified naval aviation structure across older and newer assets. China also launched a new marine observation satellite on a Long March rocket. This continues a steady expansion of space-based maritime awareness capabilities. While presented as civilian infrastructure, systems like this contribute directly to tracking, monitoring, and mapping ocean activity across key regions. Taken together, it strengthens China's ability to maintain persistent awareness over maritime zones that matter for both trade and security. Now shift into technology and industrial expansion. Chinese AI-driven biotech firms are increasingly embedded in global pharmaceutical development pipelines. We're seeing large-scale licensing agreements between Chinese firms and multinational pharmaceutical companies, including deals involving AI-designed drug candidates moving into global development stages. The scale here is what stands out. These are not pilot projects anymore. They are multi-billion-dollar structured partnerships that place Chinese AI systems inside core drug discovery workflows. That creates long-term integration into global healthcare innovation chains. At the same time, Chinese digital platforms continue to face regulatory pressure abroad. A major settlement involving a leading Chinese e-commerce platform in the U.S. resolved allegations related to the sale of illegal drugs and chemical products through marketplace channels. The case highlights ongoing enforcement friction between global regulators and cross-border digital platforms, especially where supply chains and payment systems are difficult to fully monitor end-to-end. And finally, there is a domestic security and information control angle inside China that stands out. A small aircraft crash into a major skyscraper in Beijing resulted in fatalities and injuries. Authorities attributed the incident to personal factors involving the pilot, but what stands out operationally is the speed of information containment. Online content was quickly removed, aviation activity was temporarily restricted, and discussion was tightly controlled across domestic platforms. Even when incidents are not politically driven, the response pattern remains consistent. Rapid stabilization of the information environment alongside physical containment. Thanks for listening and for being part of this community. If you want to support the show, leaving a review or a thoughtful comment helps others discover it. We also share a daily written intel brief on Substack, restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia and China, along with broader coverage of Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Wishing you a great day ahead.